Welcome back to another video. Today I thought we would have a look at the Fujifilm X10 digital camera. What I'm going to do with this video is give you an overview of the camera in terms of the controls and layout, but also share some of my thoughts using this over the last few years. I put a few of the features up on screen there just to remind ourselves of what we're looking at with this camera. Remember, this was released quite some time ago, over 10 years now. We do have some nice touches on the design, including a pop-up flash. With this camera, Fuji didn't go with the shutter speed and ISO dial. We've got the normal program dial. All the dials on the top plate are actually metal. They do feel quite nice. There's the exposure compensation one. In a nod towards the nostalgia side, Fuji have a threaded shutter release, so you can screw one of the old style ones into that. One of the attractions with this lens is a reasonably fast speed, f2 to 2.8, and it's a 28 to 112mm equivalent. What I like about this is the fact we have a mechanical zoom rather than a button or a switch. Unfortunately, Fuji did include the on-off power switch on the zoom as well, and I know some people have had problems with reliability on that switch. Near the hand grip we have a fairly bright and somewhat annoying LED focus assist light. Whilst we're on the subject of the grip, we do have the leatherette finish and texturing, which does give some grip. Although it isn't much of a hump there, it is better than nothing, and it is much better than, say, the Sony RX cameras, which didn't have anything at all. They're just completely smooth. The dial on the back there is plastic, but that also has a push action. You can see next to that is the rubber thumb pad. They do have a tendency to come off the thumb pad. Further down there is a second wheel there, which also has a four-way selector for your drive, flash, timer, etc. Layout on the camera is quite good. It's fairly logical and it does feel well made in terms of the finishing and build quality, metal top and bottom plates. Glad to see the tripod socket is further away from the battery compartment. You'll see the card slot and the batteries, they go in one area together. Whilst I'm on the subject of batteries, I'm finding with this particular one, the NP50, you get around about 200 shots. It's somewhat less than what I've seen in the reviews. Worth pointing out, the sensor in this camera is completely different from the normal Bayer type sensors. What it does is it gives you potential for having a much higher dynamic range, which was a problem on compact cameras back in the day. You have a few different ways of getting to these. If you go to the EXR mode, you can select them yourself or pick an EXR auto mode. And you have a range all the way up to 1600%. What I do myself is I use the normal exposure modes and reduce the image size down to 6 megapixels. As you can see, with the base of 100%, it's not that good in terms of blowing out the sky. But when you increase it up to the 400%, that manages to pull back those highlights quite nicely. If you select the full 12 megapixel image, you'll have to increase the ISO to get the higher dynamic range. There was a firmware update which did update the RAW button. If you press that now, it does bring up a control panel giving you access to settings, quick access. It's quite useful. The menus are okay. They could perhaps do with another couple of tabs, but there's no real complaints with those. One of the most disappointing areas with the camera is the manual focus. It's pretty much unusable. You have to turn the back dial continuously and rapidly, even to get small movements, particularly at close range. Really would have preferred they had a manual mechanical focus on this camera. Would have been much more useful. Let's take a look at the viewfinder. This does have a diopter adjustment. Fuji are quoting around about 85% coverage. The viewfinder does move in and out as you zoom the lens. The problem that you have is that there is no information in the viewfinder at all, and there is no parallax correction. There is an LED on the outside which glows red or green, when the green gives you your focus confirmation, so that's not the end of the world. The problem is that lack of parallax correction. It's very difficult to accurately compose with the viewfinder, and that gets worse the closer you are focusing. We'll have a quick look at the image quality now. I do tend to shoot this camera with JPEGs, but I have done RAW shots with it. up to around about ISO 3200 I would say is usable with a bit of work. There's a fair amount of colour noise there. With the JPEG up to ISO 1600 I tend to turn the noise reduction down a bit. Don't mind a bit of grain in there, helps to hold on to the details. There's various settings for the noise reduction on the JPEG, so you can experiment with those if you want to smooth out the noise a bit more. We'll move on to the autofocus now to show you that. Contrast based system, it's okay. Most of the time I find it to be quite good. It does sometimes struggle to lock on. You can change the size of the focus box though, that can help. Contrast isn't great for tracking moving subjects, but I've tended to use the camera mostly as single shots, so I would tame your expectations if you're trying to take pictures of action or anything like that. I'll show you a few sample shots now and just talk about the camera briefly. Almost always shot this camera as a 6 megapixel camera purely because you just don't get that level of detail at the full resolution, and I just find it's much easier to control the dynamic range, which was one of the main reasons that I got this camera. Going back around 10 years or so, dynamic range was definitely a problem with these smaller sensor compacts. So I was much more interested in the dynamic range than I was resolution. You can get some degree of background blur with this, although obviously it's not going to be anywhere near as much as a larger sensor camera. Image quality is definitely a step up though from the very small sensors, coupled with the lens, which I've always found to be very good in terms of the resolution. The f2 to f2.8 helps quite a lot with low light situations. So typically you probably won't need to go up to very high ISOs in most shooting situations. I've also used the camera quite a lot for test shots on the channel. Reason for that is the fact that I can also go into close-up modes or a macro mode, and this one does have quite a good macro mode. This isn't quite one-to-one magnification, but it isn't far off, so it is quite a useful camera for close-up and macro shooting. Haven't done any video samples in this review, but I have used it quite a bit on my earlier videos, and the video quality is perfectly okay. It's not the smallest compact camera out there, but still very manageable in terms of size and weight. I did try the X20, which did offer a number of improvements over this camera, but I never got on with that camera. I just didn't like the sensor, and the video output was actually really significantly worse than the X10. Be interested to hear your thoughts if you use one of these, so do drop a comment down below, and thanks for watching.